Okay, number 9. Why can't I just leave it as 8 minus 5i divided by 3 minus I? Why can you not just leave it like that? Right, you cannot have an imaginary number in the denominator. So to get rid of it, what do we have to do? Multiply by the complex conjugate. Well, what would the complex conjugate of the denominator be? 3 plus I. When you're doing the complex conjugate, you only change the sign of the complex number, not the real number. So the 3 stays 3, but the minus I becomes plus I. Now, you also have to do that to the top, because when you have 3 plus I over 3 plus I, what is that? What's anything divided by itself? 1. When you multiply something by 1, does it change the value of it? Like, what's 5 times 1? 5. So multiplying by 1 did nothing, right? So we're essentially multiplying by 1 here, which is not changing the problem. It's just a method to get rid of the I. Okay, so now when we go to multiply the numerator, what method do we have to use? FOIL. Okay, because we have a binomial times a binomial. So we're going to FOIL. Okay, what do I need to do first when I FOIL it? What multiplies together first? The 8 times the 3, which is 24. Then the next letter in FOIL is O, which is your outer terms. What are your outer terms? 8 times I, which is positive 8i. Then the next letter in FOIL is I, which is your inner terms. What are your inner terms? And that is negative 15i. And then what's the last letter of FOIL? L. And so that's negative 5i and positive I, which is... Okay, now I know there's some things in the numerator that could be simplified, but before we do that, let's go ahead and FOIL the denominator as well. When you FOIL the denominator, what do you multiply together first? Which is 9. Then you multiply 3 times I, which is 3i. And then negative I times 3, which is, and then negative I times positive I, which is, right. Okay, so now that we've FOILed both the numerator and the denominator, we're going to simplify one at a time, starting with the numerator. Okay, I'll take the work down here so that I have room. What can be done to simplify that numerator? Okay, 8i minus 15i is negative 7i. Okay, and then I cross that out. That way I know I've dealt with it and it doesn't get in my way. What else can be simplified in the numerator? Okay, well, what do we know I squared equals? So a negative 5 times a negative 1 is a positive 5, and when you add that 5 to 24, you get a 29. And remember, standard form for complex numbers is always a plus bi. The real number, then the complex number. Okay, now we have to simplify the denominator. What can we do in the denominator? Right, and wasn't that our whole goal, to get rid of the i's in the denominator? That was the whole purpose of multiplying by the conjugate, because it will get rid of the i's every time. Now, what else can be simplified? Okay, so don't we have a minus a negative 1? What's a minus a negative 1? Plus 1, and when you add that 1 to the 9, you get a 10. But then remember, we always break them apart. 29 over 10 minus 7i over 10. Can either one of those be reduced? Nope. So the final answer is C. C. Look at B. It's got a 9 in the bottom under that 29 instead of 10. Okay, number 10. What do I need to do first for number 10? Multiply by the conjugate, which is what? Negative 8 minus 7i. Okay, when you're doing the conjugate, the real number stays the same, The complex number changes its sign. Okay, to multiply the numerator, what method is going to have to be used? Just distributing. So 6 times negative 8 is negative 48. And 6 times negative 7i is, right. Okay, what method is going to be needed to do the denominator? FOIL. Okay, when I FOIL, what do I multiply first? Negative 8 times, which is positive 64. Then I do negative 8 times negative 7i, which is positive 56i. Don't forget the I. And then what do I multiply next? The inner, which is a positive 7i and a negative 8, and that gives me a negative 56i. And then I do what? 7i times negative 7i, which is, okay, can anything be done in the numerator? No. Okay, they cannot be combined. There's no I squared, so it's ready to go. And it's already in standard form. Can anything be done in the denominator? Right, look, 56i minus 56i cancels. And that was the whole goal, to get rid of the i's. So, like I said yesterday, once you get the hang of this, when you're foiling the denominators, can't you kind of start skipping over outer and inner and go straight from first to last? Okay, what else can be simplified in the denominator? Right. A negative 49 times I squared is like a negative 49 times a negative 1, which is positive 49. And then when you add that to 64, you get 113. And then when you split it apart, you get negative 48 over 113 minus 42i over 113, which is answer D. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to try number 11 before we go over it. Alright, first thing you have to do is get this imaginary number out of the denominator. So to do that, we have to do what? How do you get the imaginary number out of the denominator? Step 1. Right, multiply by the complex conjugate, which is negative 10 minus 6i. And you have to do that to the top and bottom. Now, when we multiply the top, what method are you using? What method are you using in the top? Distributing. 6i times negative 10 is a negative 60i. 6i times negative 6i is a negative 36i squared. Any questions about how I got the numerator? Okay, in the denominator, we have to FOIL, but like I was saying earlier, we know that the whole purpose here was to get rid of the i's, and we multiplied by the conjugate to achieve that, so we know that they're going to cancel out. So for that reason, we can skip the outer and the inner when we FOIL and just do the first terms and the last term. Well, what are the first terms? Negative 10 times negative 10, which is 100. What are the last terms? 6i and negative 6i, which is negative 36i squared, right? Okay, now, what can be simplified? Right, well, doesn't this negative 36i squared become a positive 36? So wouldn't the numerator, since it's the same thing, become another positive 36? Okay, so we can see that the denominator is 136, because 100 plus 36 is 136. How do you write the numerator? Is that standard form? Right. Standard form is the real number, then the complex number. So now when you break it apart, you get 36 over 136 minus 60i over 136. But I don't see that answer, so that must mean what? that can be reduced. What is 36 over 136? 9 over 34. And what's 60 over 136? Right, so B is the right answer. Okay, now let's look at 12. 12 can be a little tricky. There's a negative sign, so who does the negative belong to? Why can't it? It's out in the middle, so how do you know? It's not both, because think about it. There's just one, right? So could you take one negative and give it to both of them? And think about it. If you put it on both of them, don't you now have a positive, because a negative over negative is a positive? So we can't do that. It belongs to one or the other. You choose whoever you want to give it to. I normally just always go with the numerator. Oops, that's not white. Okay, so I always just put it up on the numerator. And so now, once you've done that, you can see that we need to multiply by what? Negative 8i over negative 8i. And then that equals, what do you get when you multiply the numerator? Because if this was an 8i, the conjugate of it would be a negative 8i.
I thought you said...
We're on number 12. Yeah. Okay, look, I gave that negative that was out in the middle to the 7. So that means my 8i was positive. So when I try to get rid of it, I have to multiply by the conjugate, which would be negative 8i. And so now, negative 7 times negative 8i is positive 56i. 8i times negative 8i is negative 64i squared. But since I squared equals a negative 1, negative 1 times negative 64 is positive 64. And then that can be reduced to what over what? 7i over 8. Okay, go ahead and try 13 by yourself. Okay, number 13. What do I need to multiply by to get that I out of the denominator? I. Right, a positive I over I. So in the numerator, 3 times I becomes 3i. In the denominator, negative I times positive I becomes negative I squared. So, don't even. So 3i over, what is a negative I squared?
I.
What's an I squared? No, what's an I squared?
Oh, negative 1.
So a negative 1 is a positive 1, and 3i over positive 1 is 3i. Okay, you're going to be finishing this page by yourself. While you're working on it, I'm going to bring around the test review, which is what you're going to work on tonight. Tomorrow, we are going to go over the test review, but there's not enough time in a 45-minute class for me to say, okay, y'all try 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll go over them. I'm just going to be going over 1, going over 2. There will be no time for you to work it. So if you want to do well on this, you work it by yourself tonight, okay?